Greetings everyone, this is Jed Schlackman. In this video I'll be speaking about some medical misunderstandings of genetics and disease, the relationship between those, and also the very definition or understanding of how genetics function and of disease and the function or purpose of disease. In the mainstream medical system, and particularly now in the field of biomedical research, there's a lot of focus on finding links or correlations between genetic patterns, genetic expression, and particular physical or mental health conditions. There's obviously some value and use to finding these correlations or connections. However, we need to have a more holistic understanding, a deeper perspective on what significance those connections may have, so that we can be better informed about how to overcome particular conditions or illnesses, or avoid the expression of those illnesses or diseases through having a greater awareness of how genetics and disease operate. One way to think about genetics is that as biological organisms and species, there's always a need for survival. So the consciousness, the field of information of that organism or species, is always seeking to expand and improve its ability to survive, to function, to adapt or handle various stresses that it encounters. And whenever a member of that organism or species encounters some type of stress or challenge and develops a way to cope or adapt with that, this now becomes part of a field of information or memory. That memory then gets recorded and passed along through the genetic mechanism to offspring, to future generations. So we carry these coping mechanisms encoded in this genetic memory field, this ancestral memory in a sense. So when we have that activated or expressed in our life, it's usually as a result of some stress or trigger that has some connection or similarity to the original stress or challenge that was faced by an ancestor. Sometimes it's more of a biological stress, sometimes it's more of a psychological, a cognitive type of stress, or emotional stress, you could say. So we're always adapting and developing new skills or ways of coping, and these are recorded kind of like programs in that field of information that we can tap into. The current field of epigenetics explores a lot about how this operates, about how our perception and our environment are what are actually key variables in the activation of genetic codes or genetic potentials. So when you encounter a particular environment, your perception of that environment, how you react or respond to it, will determine, in a sense, what coping mechanism is activated. And this is happening to a great extent on an unconscious level, especially when we haven't become more mindful, more conscious, more psychologically and spiritually developed, where we're able to more intentionally focus or shift our way of reacting or responding to life. So it's very valuable and vital, in a sense, to have those programs recorded on a subconscious level, on a biological level, so that when any individual being encounters a stress or challenge, they have a way to handle and adapt to it. So there's that positive aspect that we have built-in coping mechanisms and adaptation tools, but then there's the other side of this where that can become limiting, where we can become stuck in a particular adaptation or coping mechanism that may have been useful or the only mechanism available at some other point in time and space. But in the present, there are better ways that we could develop to handle or cope with that stress or challenge. And if we just remain stuck in the past recorded way of handling things, we may not rise to a greater potential. So if we think about different health issues, different diseases, different psychiatric or psychological disorders that people are diagnosed with, we can start to see how those get triggered by the environmental stresses we encounter, and in particular the perception we have about those environments, the meaning or interpretation that we give to them. So things are very much subjective, especially on the psychological level, perhaps not so much on the physical or biological level. So if your physical body is encountering some type of toxic chemical in the environment, or some type of extreme cold or extreme heat, things of that nature, there's less of a role of our psychological perception of those. However, there is even a psychological element to those situations or circumstances, so we can develop our consciousness to a point where our body and energy field are very much empowered and coherent and able to use the optimal coping mechanism to deal with those types of stresses also. The more coherence there is to our consciousness and our energy field, the more energetic resources we have available to us to address or deal with any challenge that we're presented with.